The 15th of April, 1945, southwest of Bergen, Nazi Germany. The British 11th Armoured Division liberates Bergen Belsen, one of the worst Nazi concentration camps, which would epitomize the true bestiality and horrors of the Nazi regime and its death camps. The British forces find 13,000 unburied dead bodies and almost 60,000 prisoners who are sick and starved. Thousands of other inmates will die of various diseases such as typhus and tuberculosis during the months following the camp's liberation. The British forces capture male and female Nazi personnel responsible for these horrors and force them to help bury the dead bodies in mass graves. One of them is a German Nazi doctor, Fritz Klein. Fritz Klein was born as an ethnic German on the 24th of November, 1888 in Kodlia, today's Romania, then part of Austria-Hungary. He studied medicine at the University of Budapest, and after the outbreak of the First World War, he took part in fights on the Eastern Front, where in March 1915, he was taken prisoner by the Russians. After the end of the war, he lived and worked as a doctor in Romania. World War II started on the 1st of September 1939, and Fritz Klein was drafted into the Romanian army. From June 1941, he served as a paramedic on the Eastern Front during Operation Barbarossa, which was a code name for the German invasion of the Soviet Union, which Romania joined as a member of the Axis powers, providing equipment and oil to Nazi Germany, as well as committing a large number of troops to the Eastern Front. After Adolf Hitler demanded that all ethnic Germans in the Romanian army be drafted into the German army, Fritz Klein joined the Waffen-SS on the 26th of May 1943. He could not join the German Wehrmacht because he did not have German nationality. Klein was sent to the Auschwitz concentration camp in Nazi-occupied Poland, where he arrived in December 1943. The camp's commandant was Rudolf Hoess, and Klein became a doctor in the women's compound and later in the Gypsy Family Camp, which existed for 17 months. Romani families deported to the Gypsy Family Camp were held together instead of being separated, as was typical at Auschwitz. The conditions in the camp were horrible. One Holocaust survivor described it as hell on earth. The prisoners, half crazed with hunger, were crammed inside the barracks, which were icy cold. To keep warm, all the inmates had to huddle together. Fritz Klein still belonged to the Auschwitz personnel when on the 2nd of August 1944, 2,897 surviving men, women and children from this Gypsy family camp were murdered in the gas chambers at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Klein was an anti-Semite and approved of the Holocaust from a moral point of view. It was during his time at Auschwitz when he said to one of the prisoners, "My Hippocratic oath tells me to cut a gangrenous appendix out of the human body. The Jews are the gangrenous appendix of mankind. That's why I cut them out." As the SS doctor, Fritz Klein was also active in selections on the ramp. When the transport was inbound, Klein always received a message by telephone and traveled down to the station in a Red Cross vehicle. The people from the transports were divided into two groups, those who were fit for work and those who were not, such as children up to the age of 15, as well as those who were too weak or sick. They were then later murdered in gas chambers. The decisions if someone was capable of labor or was to be killed immediately were made simply by looking at the victims and sometimes asking a few questions. After the war, Fritz Klein claimed that he only made decisions if someone was able to work or not. What happened to them afterwards had nothing to do with him. There were also selections in the camp's hospitals at Auschwitz. The doctors would provide lists of those patients who would be fit for labor in 1 to 2 weeks or who had no chance of recovery. After the war, of the latter group, he claimed that either nothing happened to them or they were suddenly taken away, but he did not know where. However, Klein must have known that they were murdered. Fritz Klein left Auschwitz in December 1944 and arrived at Bergen Belsen, which was a camp for sick people, in January 1945. Sanitary conditions were terrible, and there was no water for washing and hardly enough for drinking and cooking. Between January and March 1945, when the prisoners were sent on death marches from the other concentration camps, about 1/3 of the prisoners who arrived in the transports were already dead. and almost 80% of the rest had to be fetched by truck from the station, as they were too weak and sick to walk. On one occasion, out of a transport of 1,900 inmates, over 500 arrived dead. The prisoners got almost no food during these death marches, and there was no food when they arrived at the camp either. The camp was so overcrowded that during the winter months when it was freezing cold, the prisoners had to sleep in a sitting position on the floor and somehow try to share only 200 blankets in a camp of tens of thousands of prisoners. In March 1945, due to starvation, thirst, and the outbreak of typhus epidemics, the average daily mortality rate of the prisoners was between 250 and 300. When Klein realized that the end of the war was inevitable and the Allies were approaching, he turned around completely, and as with the camp's commandant Josef Kramer, he even tried to find food for hungry and typhoid-ridden prisoners. Thus, when the British forces liberated Bergen Belsen, Fritz Klein remained in the camp and did not flee as many of the camp's guards had done. He had hoped that he would not be punished for his crimes after the war would be over, but he was wrong. Klein was arrested and, together with other members of the SS guards, were forced over the next few days to bury the corpses of prisoners lying around the camp in large mass graves. This is how a famous photo of Fritz Klein standing in the middle of a mass grave was taken. Klein, a doctor who should have helped people instead of participating in their systematic murder, ended up burying thousands of dead bodies, victims murdered by the criminal Nazi regime, which he served until the very end. Klein was then tried at the Belsen trial, which began on the 17th of September 1945. At the trial, he claimed that he did not approve killings in gas chambers, but he did not protest either, as that was no use at all. When he was asked about the prisoners being beaten by the SS, he claimed that when he received people into the hospital, they were beaten rather by the capos and other inmates than the SS. However, his lies did not help him escape justice. The British military tribunal found Fritz Klein guilty of crimes he had committed at Auschwitz and Bergen Belsen and sentenced him to death by hanging. He was 57 years old when the British executioner Albert Pierrepoint carried out the sentence on the 13th of December 1945. There were no tears shed for Fritz Klein. Thanks for watching the World History Channel, and don't miss our next videos. Click the subscribe button now for more interesting clips, give us a like, and see you in the following episode.